Dias is a veteran soldier who, after spending decades fighting in war, is rewarded by the king with his own domain. It has already been a month since he was half forced into a carriage and sent away from the royal capital, and to be honest, he isn't very happy about leaving. Once the carriage finally comes to a stop, one of the officials tells him that they have arrived at his new domain, saying it is a fitting reward for an upstart orphan like him. The official hands him a map showing the boundaries of the territory, along with an inventory of supplies personally provided by the king. He explains that this grassland is called Nesros and that, from this day onward, Dias will be known as Dias Nesros. Dias simply stares at him with a blank expression until the official leaves. With nothing else to do, Dias decides to take a walk around his new domain, and as he walks across the endless grasslands, he remembers the day the king granted him this territory as a reward for his achievements during the war. He doesn't really understand what it means to be a lord, but from what little he was told, a lord's job is to live in his domain, protect his subjects, and collect taxes for the king. He keeps walking for hours, but he doesn't meet a single person, and there isn't even a tree in sight. He decides to stop and rest for a while, and as he drinks some water from a nearby stream, he can't help but smile because after spending so many years drinking muddy water on the battlefield, having access to clean water feels like a luxury. By the time night falls, Dias comes to a decision. He tells himself that he is going to give this place his best shot, but if things still look hopeless after another 2 days, he will leave before he ends up dying out here. If it comes to that, he will simply find a nearby village and make himself useful however he can, so that he can continue honoring his parents' dying wishes. With that, he lies down on the ground and goes to sleep. The next morning, Dias is suddenly awakened by someone kicking him. He looks up in confusion and sees a young girl staring down at him. Before he even has time to process what is happening, she demands to know who he is and what he is doing there. Dias calmly introduces himself and tells her that he was sleeping. She looks completely baffled and asks if he's an idiot, but Dias simply explains that he was told to live here, and right now, his immediate goal is to stay alive because he doesn't want to die. The girl becomes increasingly frustrated, convinced that he has to be joking, but Dias assures her that he is being completely serious. He tells her that he wants to fulfill his parents' dying wishes by being useful to others and protecting people whenever he can. The moment he finishes speaking, the horn growing from her forehead suddenly begins glowing with a faint blue light. She stares at him in confusion and asks why he isn't lying, but Dias simply replies that he has no reason to lie, causing the horn to glow blue once again. She immediately asks whether he is an enemy or an ally, but Dias hesitates because they only just met. Growing impatient, she demands an answer, and Dias suddenly realizes that this is his domain. If that's the case, then she must be one of his subjects, and there is no reason for him not to stand by her. He immediately declares that he is her ally and promises that no matter what enemy appears, he will protect her. The instant those words leave his mouth, the horn shines brighter than ever before, forcing Dias to cover his eyes as he wonders what just happened. Without giving him any explanation, the girl grabs him and drags him back to her village so he can meet the chieftain. As they arrive, Dias notices all the villagers staring suspiciously at him. But the only thing he can think about is how surprised he is that he somehow failed to find this village yesterday despite wandering around the area all day. When they meet the chieftain, she immediately asks the girl whether her horn glowed red at any point, and the girl, whose name is Alna, shakes her head and says it remained blue the entire time. She even explains that when she asked whether Dias was her ally, the blue light became brighter than ever after he answered yes. Curious, the chieftain asks Dias, "If you are Alna's ally, would you also become mine?" Without even pausing to think about it, Dias says of course he would. He says everyone here is his subject, and after all, the king sent him here to protect them. The moment he mentions the king, Alna immediately draws her bow and points it at him. But before she can do anything else, the chieftain raises a hand and tells her not to be hasty. The chieftain introduces herself as Mol and asks Dias to start from the beginning and explain exactly how the king ended up sending him here, and Dias agrees and begins talking about his past. His earliest memories are of living with his parents. His mother always told him to do work that other people would find useful, while his father always told him to become a man who protects the weak. Those ended up becoming their final words to him before they both died during an epidemic when he was 10 years old. After losing his parents, Dias gathered together other children who had become orphans as well. They earned money by cleaning the town and collecting rewards for hunting weak monsters, and throughout it all, Dias always tried to live according to his parents' wishes. When he turned 15, war broke out and he volunteered to fight so he could protect the people important to him. As the years passed, he discovered that he had a natural talent for warfare, and after fighting for 20 long years, the war finally came to an end. As a reward for everything he had accomplished, the king granted him this domain. After hearing his story, Mol believes Daius is sincere when he says he wants to protect his subjects, but she asks him one more question. If they weren't his subjects, would he still choose to be their ally? Daius immediately answers yes, but only after saying it does he realize something important. They were never his subjects to begin with, and, in fact, they are enemies of the kingdom. Mol finally introduces herself properly as the chieftain of the Anakin tribe. For generations, her people have fought against the kingdom over ownership of these grasslands, but 50 years ago, they suffered a crushing defeat and were forced to flee. Daius wonders how they managed to continue living here after losing the war, so Mol demonstrates the answer. By storing mana inside the horns on their heads, the Anakin are able to cast a variety of powerful spells. Using that magic, they conceal their entire village from the outside world, hiding not only the village itself, but every trace of their presence. Daius is a little uncertain about whether Mol should really be telling him all of this since he technically serves the kingdom, but Mol reassures him that there is nothing to worry about. She explains that if his horn reading had been anything other than blue, she never would have revealed any of this to him. The Anakin possess a spell called Soul Appraiser. Whenever they are in the presence of danger or hostility, the horn on their head shines red. If the other person is harmless and bears no hostility, it shines white, while blue means that person will one day bring joy or blessings to the tribe. She explains that if Daius had lied to them at any point, Alna's horn would have immediately turned red, but it never did, and that is why she chose to trust him. Mol says she hopes Daius becomes a superb lord one day, and she offers him shelter, food, and even some livestock to help him get started. In return, she asks only one thing, that he never tells anyone about the village, not even the king. Daius readily agrees because he has no reason to cause trouble for them. As long as they don't start another conflict with the kingdom, he doesn't mind them continuing to live peacefully on the plains. Mol then casually announces that she will be assigning Alna to help Daius with his work and look after him, causing Alna to immediately let out a loud scream. The villagers help Daius set up a tent, and Alna explains that everyone in the village lives in tents because they can quickly pack everything up whenever they encounter a danger that can't simply be avoided through concealment. She tells Daius that the rest of his supplies will be delivered shortly and that she will teach him how to care for the livestock later. Before he leaves, she hands him a small pouch of Mittani dust and explains that when it is scattered around, its scent attracts nearby beasts. If he hunts those beasts, he can bring their meat and hides back to the village and trade them for more supplies. Daius immediately heads out to hunt. After walking a good distance away from the village, he suddenly realizes that he forgot to ask Alna how much Mittani dust he was supposed to use. Since he has no idea, he simply pours out the entire bag and waits. It doesn't take long before a herd of black geese comes charging toward him. Rather than panicking, Daius looks excited. His instincts from years on the battlefield immediately take over as he swings his battle axe with overwhelming strength. By the time the fighting is over, nearly half the herd has been wiped out, but Daius then realizes he has overlooked one very important problem. There is no way he can carry all of them back by himself. By the time the sun begins setting, Daius is slowly making his way back to the village with a single black geese slung over his shoulders. He feels a little disappointed that after defeating so many of them, he could only bring one back, and he figures Alna is probably going to make fun of him again. However, when he arrives, Alna is actually impressed and praises him for bringing down a black geese on his very first hunt. Daius casually tells her that this wasn't the only one he killed. He explains that he actually hunted nearly half a herd but couldn't carry the rest back. The moment Alna hears that, she immediately runs off to gather some of the villagers so they can help retrieve the remaining black geese. After hearing what happened, Mol comes over to congratulate Daius. She calls him strong and superbly manly, leaving Daius confused about what she means by manly, and when he asks her to explain, Mol tells him that a man's value comes from whether he is hardworking and dependable. According to her, those are the qualities that make a man truly manly, and anything else has no value to a woman. Mol then casually remarks that if Daius were ever to marry Alna, people would naturally expect a much larger wedding gift than usual. Daius immediately tries to deny that anything like that is happening, but Mol simply laughs and tells him not to worry, because humans and Anakin are perfectly capable of having children together. The next morning, Daius wakes up to find Alna preparing breakfast for him. After taking a bite, he tells her that she's a very good cook. Alna then asks what he plans to hunt today, and Daius wonders whether yesterday's haul wasn't enough. She explains that if Daius hopes to attract more people to settle in his domain, he's going to need things like a well and a privy. If he wants the village's craftsmen to build them, he will need more goods to trade. Daius immediately says he'll go hunt more black geese, but Alna quickly refuses. Instead, she tells him to hunt monsters. Their meat is too full of miasma for anyone to eat, but their claws, horns, and the magic stones inside their hearts can all be sold for a good price. Daius asks whether there are any monsters nearby, and Alna says she can use the power of her horn to track them down. Daius objects at first because he thinks monsters are too dangerous for her to get involved with, but after some reluctance, he finally agrees to let her guide him. Later that day, Daius is outside brushing the sheep's wool when several villagers arrive with the rest of his supplies. They apologize that his yurts haven't been finished yet, but Daius tells them not to worry because he isn't in any hurry. Just then, Alna walks out wearing clothes suitable for traveling, and Daius can't help being captivated by her for a brief moment. The nearby villagers immediately become so jealous that they look ready to explode, while Daius awkwardly clears his throat and tells Alna that they should get going if they're going hunting. They are in the middle of traveling when Alna recites a spell and uses magic to pinpoint exactly where a monster is. Alna tells Daius that it's a big monster. Daius tells her he will take a look first, but Alna refuses and reminds him that she can use concealment, and if things take a bad turn, she can always use concealment on both of them and they can escape. Daius and Alna look together and find out it's an earth dragon and not just a big turtle. Daius decides to try giving it a whack. Alna warns him not to try it, saying it is too reckless to charge in alone, but Daius doesn't listen and decides to fight head-on. He tells her to stay out of sight. Daius takes a swing at its scaly body with his axe but finds that the scales are too tough to break through. He then switches tactics and tries going for its weak spot, but the earth dragon covers all its weak points and curls up to protect them. Alna again reminds Daius that taking on an earth dragon is too reckless, but Daius would rather run out of options than retreat. He climbs onto the dragon's back and continues swinging his axe, hoping to break through, but the blade begins to chip. Still, he pushes forward, using his will to reinforce his axe and keep fighting. The dragon's miasma begins to affect Alna. Daius decides to take one final swing before retreating. The blow finally breaks a scale, and in response, the dragon launches fireballs at him. Daius uses the opening to strike its weak point and injures the beast. The dragon gathers energy for a final fireball, aiming at Alna. Daius seizes the moment and strikes the dragon's back, killing it. After that, two villagers searching the mountains for Daius and Alna stumble across them in awkward state and can barely process what they're looking at. When the group returns to the village, the news spreads instantly and everyone is stunned that Daius managed to bring down an earth dragon on his own. The celebration that follows is immediate and loud. Getting the dragon's corpse back to the village turns out to be an ordeal in itself, and by the time they finish transporting the massive body, morning has already broken. Moll finds Daius and tells him flat out that she can't quite believe he pulled it off alone. Daius, unfazed by the praise, gets straight to business and asks whether trading the dragon's remains for a well and a privy is a reasonable exchange. Moll almost laughs. She tells him a single leg of the creature is more than enough to have several of each built, and when Daius asks whether it's really worth that much, she confirms it exceeds anything the village can fully compensate him for. The best they can offer in return is butchering the beast along with his privy, a well, yurt materials, provisions, and medicinal herbs, and they'll even put up a storage yurt for him to keep the leftover materials. Daius is genuinely appreciative. Moll then brings up Alna and suggests he set something aside from the dragon as a wedding gift, adding that her parents would likely be overjoyed to receive a fang or claw. Daius looks confused and asks what marriage has to do with any of this. Moll tells him simply that he's getting married whether he's thought about it or not, and that the village will do whatever it takes to secure a close bond with a neighbor who kills earth dragons for a living. She also points out that even if he somehow avoids marrying Alna, every other eligible woman in the village will be at his door before long given what he's just accomplished. Daius says that sounds like a serious problem. Moll tells him not to worry since Alna has already gone to speak with her parents about the marriage herself. Daius goes quiet for a moment and wonders aloud if that's why he hasn't seen her since they got back, and Moll confirms it. He asks if they're considered engaged now, and Moll explains that Anakin don't have engagement customs the way humans do. Among her people, you simply get married, and the only real choice involved is deciding when it happens. That's about as close to the human concept of engagement as it gets. She also adds that building closer ties through marriage will serve him well if he ever intends to become a proper lord in this region. Daius says he appreciates the concern but admits it catches him off guard and asks why she cares so much about his future. Moll gives him a straightforward answer. If something happens to him, there's no telling what kind of lord might end up taking his place, and that uncertainty is something she'd rather avoid. With that, she leaves him to attend to her own duties. Daius overhears some villagers talking about how much Alna has accomplished even though she is still so young. Curious, he asks them how old she really is. The villagers tell him she just turned 15 and has only recently become old enough to get married. They joke that she already managed to catch someone as impressive as him. Dais is completely shaken after hearing that Alna is only 15. He cannot believe he is expected to marry someone that young when he is already 35 years old enough to be her father. In his own kingdom, people have to be at least 18 before they are allowed to marry. Dais quickly starts making a plan. He decides they can stay engaged for the next 3 years, and during that time he will work on becoming a proper, full-fledged lord. By the end of those 3 years, he hopes he will have found his resolve as both a lord and a man. Just then, Alna calls out to him and happily tells him that their wedding has already been arranged. She then asks what he would like for breakfast the next morning, and Dias tells her that he will gladly eat whatever she makes. The other villagers soon begin congratulating Dias on his marriage to Alna, but he quickly tries to clear things up. He explains that they are only getting engaged and are not actually married yet. The villagers simply laugh and tell him not to be so shy. Sometime after the banquet, the new well and privy that Dias traded materials for are finally completed, and everyone settles back into their normal daily lives. Dias finishes putting up another yurt and looks over his work with satisfaction. He admits that it is not a bad first attempt, but he knows he needs to become much better at building them so his future subjects will not have to sleep outside when they arrive. Then reality suddenly hits him. He does not have a single subject yet. That leaves him wondering what he needs to do to convince people to come and live under his rule. Before he can think about it any longer, Alna calls out to Dias and tells him she has sensed a monster coming from the north. She explains that she has placed a life detection spell over the grasslands, allowing her to sense whenever people or monsters enter the area. Dias asks how many monsters there are, and Alna tells him there is only one. It is not very large, but it is heading straight toward them. Dias has no intention of letting it destroy the well and privy he worked so hard to build, so he decides to hunt it down before it gets any closer. Alna immediately says she will go with him. She explains that even if the monster is small, they should still fight together instead of facing it alone. Dias then asks about the bars. They are sleeping by themselves, and if nobody is there when they wake up, they will become lonely and start crying. Bars that grow attached to people suffer terrible anxiety whenever they are left alone. To solve the problem, Alna asks the villagers who are delivering supplies to Dias to stay behind and watch over the bars while they are gone. Dias and Alna soon find the ogre that Alna detected earlier and hide behind a large rock while watching it. Dias decides they cannot allow it to get any closer to their home, so the two of them rush out together. Alna fires an arrow at the ogre, but it quickly knocks the arrow away before it can hit. At the same time, Dias charges in with his axe, but the ogre is surprisingly fast and easily dodges his attack. Dias rushes at it once again, but the ogre keeps its distance and refuses to let him get close enough to land a clean hit. Alna tells Dias that she is going to slow it down and tells him to keep attacking. She fires another arrow and hits the ogre in the leg, slowing its movement. Taking advantage of the opening, Dias leaps high into the air and swings his axe, cutting straight through the ogre. After the battle, Alna smiles and tells Dias that fighting together was a good idea since they are now married. Dias quickly tries to explain that they are not married yet and are only engaged, but before he can finish, Alna steps back and complains that the ogre's blood smells terrible. She tells him to clean himself before coming back because she is not letting him inside the yurt while he smells like that. With no room to argue, Dias quietly does as he is told. As evening falls, Dias still cannot believe how difficult it is to wash away the horrible smell of ogre blood. Just then, Alna calls out to him with exciting news. She tells him that they are pregnant, and Dias instantly shouts with joy. He rushes over to Francoise, happily pets her, and says he cannot believe she became pregnant so quickly. Seeing this, Francis becomes jealous and starts making noises to get Dias's attention, so Dias laughs and pets him as well. Alna then explains that the news is not completely good. She tells Dias that bears are very intelligent animals. They can fully understand human language and willingly allow themselves to be domesticated because living with people is much safer. However, that intelligence also makes them much more vulnerable to fear and emotional stress, especially when they are pregnant. Sometimes their fear becomes so overwhelming that it can even kill them. To keep them calm until they give birth, the strongest person around must stay close to reassure them. Because of that, Francoise and Francis will have to stay inside the yurt with them. It will be crowded, messy, and smelly, but there is no other choice. Dias simply asks if that is all. He says it does not bother him in the slightest because Francoise and Francis are part of their family. If letting them stay inside means their child will be born safely, then putting up with a little mess is nothing. Hearing those words, Alna tells Dias that he is not only manly but also incredibly kind, and she begins tearing up. A moment later, Alna's horn suddenly begins glowing green. Daius asks if someone is coming, and she confirms that people are approaching from the east. She says they feel like humans. Daius decides to go and meet them himself, but before leaving, he tells Alna to hide herself and the bears with her concealment magic. He assures her that he will be fine and then sprints toward the approaching group. As Daius gets closer, he wonders whether the newcomers are friends or enemies. If they are hostile and carrying bows, they could be dangerous, so he decides to close the distance before they have a chance to attack. Just then, one of the men recognizes him. It is Klaus, one of Daius's old comrades from the war. Klaus greets him warmly, and Daius smiles, saying he is glad to see his old friend safe and healthy. Daius asks what brought him all the way out there, and Klaus explains that he was ordered to act as both a scout and an escort. The real person who wants to meet Daius is the third princess of the kingdom. Klaus then asks Daius to lead them to his manor because everyone is exhausted after traveling for more than half a month. After they arrive at Daius's yurt, the princess formally introduces herself as Diane, the third princess of the kingdom. Daius is surprised that someone so important traveled all the way to see him. Diane looks around and asks whether his manor is still being built because she cannot see any servants. Daius tells her that he does not have a manor or any servants. All he owns is the yurt standing in front of them. He admits it may not look impressive, but he built it himself through hard work. Diane is confused and asks what happened to the craftsman. She believed the king had given Daius a large reward along with enough money to get started. Daius tells her that the king never gave him a single copper coin. Diane can hardly believe what she is hearing. Daius explains that he was abandoned there without any food or water and honestly thought he was going to die. Wanting to get to the point, Daius asks Diane why she came all the way to visit him. She explains that the kingdom is on the verge of war. In the royal capital, more and more people are demanding another conflict, and she has come to ask for his help. As payment, she even offers to marry him herself. Daius refuses without hesitation. He says there is no way he is leaving Françoise behind while she is pregnant. Diane asks if offering even greater rewards would change his mind, but Daius firmly refuses again. He tells them that if that is all they came for, they are free to leave. One of Diane's bodyguards loses his temper. Angry that a commoner keeps rejecting and insulting the princess, he draws his sword and prepares to attack. Before he can even make a move, Daius instantly shatters the sword with ease. He calmly tells them once more to leave, and this time they have no choice but to obey. As they walk away, Diane is clearly frustrated that Daius rejected her offer. She vows that one day she will make him regret his decision. After watching them leave, Daius steps outside, and Alna finally removes the concealment spell. She tells him that while the visitors were there, one person's soul made her horn glow blue, while the others caused it to glow red and white. Daius asks how long she had been watching, and Alna admits that Françoise became anxious because she could not stay close to him. To calm her down, Alna hid herself along with the bears and secretly watched everything from nearby. Daius apologizes to Françoise for leaving her alone and praises Alna for handling the situation so well. He then asks whether the woman who made her horn glow red was hostile toward her. Alna shakes her head and explains that her soul appraisal can now sense whether someone is hostile toward both of them because they are family now. The next morning, Daius wakes up to the smell of breakfast as Alna prepares the morning meal. Suddenly, Alna's horn begins glowing green again. She tells Daius that another human is approaching. Daius wonders if it is just a traveler who lost their way, so he decides to go and check. Before leaving, he asks Alna if she is coming with him. Alna says it should not be a problem since there is only one person. She plans to use her concealment magic because she does not want Françoise and Francis to become anxious again after being separated from them. Daius agrees, and the two of them head out. Before long, Daius spots the approaching person and realizes it is Klaus. He calls out to him, and Klaus is relieved that Daius found him because he had been searching for Daius's home but got completely lost. Daius asks why Klaus did not return to the capital, and he also notices that Klaus is no longer wearing his armor. Klaus then reveals that he has been dismissed from military service. They took away both his sword and his armor. Daius immediately worries that Klaus lost his position because of what happened with Princess Diane, but Klaus quickly reassures him that it was not his fault. He explains that if another war broke out, they would have sent him straight to the front lines, and he had no desire to fight in another pointless war. Because of that, he deliberately made sure he would be dismissed from the army. Klaus then asks Daius if he can work for him instead as his personal soldier. Alna says she has no objections to the idea. Hearing her voice, Klaus is completely shocked and asks where Alna and the two bears suddenly came from. Daius smiles and tells him it is a long story. Instead of explaining everything right there, he tells Klaus to follow him back first. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.